It was 1862. The Kingdom of Prussia was ruled by Kaiser Wilhelm I, who appointed Otto von Bismarck to be the Prime Minister of Prussia. Over the next 8 years, Bismarck fought and won 3 wars with Denmark, Austria, and France. As a result of his military successes and pragmatic diplomacy, Prussia became a unified German empire by 1871.
Ich bin ein Preuße, kennt ihr meine Farbe? Die Fahne schmiegt mir weiß und schwarz voran, dass für die Freiheit meine Väter starben. Das deuten mehr durch meine Farben an. Nie werd ich bang verzagen, die jeder willigst war. Sei's trüber Tag, sei's heiter Sonnenschein, ich bin ein Preuße, will ein Preuße sein. Sei's trüber Tag, sei's heiter Sonnenschein.
With this backdrop of war and conquest in Prussia, we begin the Kersten family story. The city of Königsberg in East Prussia was a warm water port on the Baltic Sea. It had been the former capital of Prussia. Today, it is a Russian enclave, and the city is now known as Kaliningrad. That said, let's take a look at Königsberg 150 years ago. Here is where we meet our ancestors, Amalie and Hermann Koerstein. To be honest, we don't know much about their early lives. Some government and church records still exist, but they can only provide us with a black and white outline of their lives, not much more than the dates of birth, baptism, marriage, death, and the names of close relations. But we do have a few letters from relatives, some later newspaper accounts, and we can even include what we know about life in Prussia at that time. These things can help us add color to their lives. When Hermann and Amalie strolled around Königsberg or rode through the streets on a horse-drawn carriage, they probably saw some of these views of the city. In the center was a castle that dominated the skyline. It was originally built as a fortress for the Teutonic Knights in the year 1250, and much later it was enlarged to become the castle for the kings of Prussia. The Koersteins probably spent some leisure time on the nearby beach. And they undoubtedly shopped in the busy city market to buy meats and vegetables. If you saw them walking together, what sort of clothing did the Koersteins of Königsberg wear? This photo of a family from Berlin in 1860 shows one example of clothing from that time period. According to historians, the costumes worn by middle-class Prussian men and women were much the same as those worn by other Europeans, and even Americans of that time. We only have one other picture of the couple, apparently taken from the same photo session. But at least this gives us an idea of how they would have dressed for special occasions. As the couple walked around Königsberg, they would have used one of the many bridges that cross the river Pregel, which flows through the city and empties into the Baltic Sea. The river includes 2 large islands in the center of the city, and there were 7 bridges connecting those 2 islands to the mainland on either side of the river. This led to one of the most famous problems in mathematics. Is it possible to chart a course across each of the bridges once, and only once, and return to the starting point? Swiss mathematician Leonhard Euler proved that this is not possible, leading to the development of 2 new branches of mathematics, graph theory and topology. The Koersteins may well have heard of the Seven Bridges puzzle, since it was posed by Euler more than a century earlier, but their daily concerns were like those of all of us to this day: food, shelter, work, friends, and family. Of course, no family appears out of thin air. Before we talk about the Koersteins' children, let's look at their parentage. We have two sources of information about Hermann's parents. One source is a family chart created by Charles Joseph Kersten, who visited Germany in 1926 and interviewed a German relative. More about that in a minute. But the most authoritative source is a civil government record of his second marriage. The government record lists Hermann's full name as the magnificent-sounding Gotthard Wilhelm Leopold August Hermann Koerstein. It's worth mentioning here that German infants were often baptized with 3 or more first names to honor relatives, godparents, or even figures from the Bible. But the given name just before the surname was the one normally used in daily life, so our ancestor simply went by the name of Hermann. Hermann's parents were named August and Matilda. His father had inherited a large estate called Saarbrücken, about 60 miles northeast of Königsberg, so the boy probably grew up there. Matilda had given birth to Hermann in 1844, but he was also raised along with 3 older sisters. Perhaps his parents' joy at finally producing a male child is what caused them to go wild with his elaborate 6-part name. At any rate, we know that he received a good education, and by the age of 25, he was a white-collar worker living in the city. To go even farther back in time, we need to take another look at the family chart compiled by Charles J. Kersten. The details were provided by a first cousin of Hermann's father named Marie Reimann, who had personal knowledge of Koerstein family history. Unfortunately, we have not yet found corroborating civil and church records, so we must reserve judgment about the truth of the earliest claims. But if true, the information is certainly intriguing. According to Mrs. Reimann, their mutual great-grandfather had the surname of van der Koerstein. He was a German nobleman who originally lived in the province of Schleswig-Holstein, and then he moved to a suburb of Potsdam called Babelsberg. He lived there in a Schloss, a German word which historically referred to a fortified castle, but by the 1800s it probably meant a palace or a large manor house. Eventually the Duke gave up his residence there and bought 2 large farms for his son. You've already heard the name of the farms: Alt und Neue, meaning old and new, Saarbrücken. At some point, van der Koerstein dropped the van der part of his name. Much of his estate was covered by woodland, so he was given the title of Leibjäger Königlich Forstmeister, or Royal Forester. He also retained the title of Duke. Now it's time to introduce yet another family history chart. This one is in Charles H. Kersten's handwriting, telling an even more grandiose tale than that of his son, Charles J. Kersten. The chart agrees with most of the story from Mrs. Reimann, but it states that van der Koerstein was originally a Dutch nobleman who traveled from Holland to Babelsberg. There he performed some great deed for the King of Prussia and was rewarded with a castle. If we assume each generation is separated by about 25 years, this Prussian king might have been Frederick the Great or his successor, Frederick William II. Remember that these 2 early stories are unverified by independent facts, so far at least. Future genealogists may be able to find evidence to support the claims. The 2 family charts share a lot of similarities, But without corroboration, we can't say whether our fourth great-grandfather was a Dutch or a German nobleman, or even whether or not these are just some rather fanciful stories. Nevertheless, it's fun to speculate. So far, I've been talking a lot about the ancestors of Hermann, but what about his wife, Amalie? Unfortunately, there is no verified information about her ancestry. We have not been able to find her birth or baptism records. We can't even find the Koerstein's marriage record to verify her maiden name. As we all know, the history of mankind often overlooks or de-emphasizes the role of women. But Amalia's missing past may also be a case of records that were lost as a result of war, or mistranslated, or having names that were misspelled, or, as in the case of Hermann, using alternative Christian names. At present, we're left with a mystery. So, knowing that we don't have verifiable documentation as yet, let's move back into the realms of hearsay and speculation. At least two relatives from our extended family informed me that Amalie was actually the Countess Amelia von Fürstenau. We know that there is a very human tendency for descendants to attribute nobility to their European forebears, whether there's a factual basis or not. But for the moment, let's assume that she might have been a German countess. Let's begin with some facts. The German phrase von Fürstenau literally means that someone is from or of a place called Fürstenau. Surprisingly, there are two towns by that name that still exist, one in Switzerland and one in Germany. There is also a Fürstenau castle, or Schloss, in the German city of Michelstadt. To complicate matters even further, there were another three towns in 19th century Prussia, all named Fürstenau. After the Prussian Empire was dismantled, all of those towns were renamed as municipalities of Poland. Why was the name Fürstenau so popular? Possibly because the name can be translated from the Old High German language as either the Prince's Meadow or the Prince's Forest. At any rate, this means that we now have 6 possible locations for our countess. Are any of these more likely than the others? Well, yes. One of them stands out because of the historical record. The Schloss Fürstenau, situated in central Germany, was a traditional fortified castle with a moat and a courtyard, built in the year 1310 to protect a nearby abbey. It has undergone numerous architectural changes over the centuries, but the one constant has been the Erbach family, which still owns the castle to this day. This is significant for us because the Counts of Erbach-Fürstenau controlled the surrounding territory and occupied the castle in an unbroken family chain since 1757. In Germany, a count was known as a Graf, and a countess was a Gräfin. Although the power of a Graf was only granted to male descendants, a woman could obtain the title of Gräfin not only by marrying a count, but by being the daughter of one. So it is possible that our Amalia was the offspring of one of the counts of Erbach-Fürstenau. Interestingly, there is a record of an Emilia, Gräfin zu Erbach-Fürstenau, but she was born in 1903, long after the events of this chronology. As stated earlier, all of this is pure speculation. All we know for certain is that a woman who went by the name of Amalie Fürstenau married a man named Hermann Koerstein, and they lived together in Königsberg. Amalia gave birth to the first of 4 children on November 9, 1869, which began a new chapter in the life of the Koersteins. We will continue the narrative in part 2 of the Kersten Family story.